what can be done.
Twilight of the eye. There is the waste of an all too rich. You trip over truths. And what are these truths? They are things that are not yet held to the. They are the utterances, statements of a man who, as a single exception, escaped for a while the general insanity of Europe with its blind idealism in the midst of squalor, poverty, nastiness, dirt, with its unscrupulous, dishonest, immoral, and ethical praise of so-called progress, while it stood knee deep in the belittlement, mockery, devaluation of men, and with its vulgar levity in the face of effeminacy, softness, gentleness, and decay. They are the utterances, observation, statements of one who voiced the aims, the hopes, and the realities of another word, not of an ideal word, not of a word beyond, but of a real word, of this word regenerated and reorganized upon a sounder, a more virile, and a more orderly basis. In fact, of a perfectly possible word, one that has already existed in the past and could exist again if only the stupendous, amazing revolution of a transvaluation of all value were made. This, then, is the nature of truths uttered by this one sane man in the whole of Europe at the end of last century, and when, owing to his unequal struggle against the overwhelming hostile forces of his time, his highly sensitive personality was at last forced to surrender itself to the enemy and become one with them. That is to say, insane. At least the record of his sanity had been safely stored away beyond the reach of time and change in the volumes which constitute his life work. The basics of politics, human nature and politics. One of the major divisions in politics is the relationship between human nature and politics. Philosophers, theologians, and psychologists as well as political scientists, have argued as to the inevitability of conflict and aggression amongst human beings. On the right, Hobbes, Thomas Hobbes, born in 1588, graduated at Oxford, mathematical tutor to Charles II and Prince of Wales.
De Maistre. Joseph de Maistre, 1754, 1821. And Nietzsche, he who has a Y, 1844, 19,000. And others have seen conflict, violence, and a struggle for dominance. Definition of state. Power, state equal power, an organization that successfully claims the monopoly of the. This reflects the way most people probably see the world. The globe is seen as divided into a series of exclusive geographical areas, countries, or nations, each of which has a government whose people recognize its authority to maintain order amongst them by force in the last resort, if necessary. This government may, of course, be divided into central, regional, and local levels, and executive, legislative, and judicial arms. But all these bodies are seen as a system for taking decisions on behalf of the nation or society. Types of state. States vary a great deal in their organization and in their concept of the role. Bernard Crick has suggested a good starting point for the classification of states, which brings out he distinct. These categories are, however, extremely broad brush, as can be seen from the variety of examples quoted in box. On the left, the potential for consensus, acceptance, agreement, and cooperation amongst human beings has been emphasized by writers such as Thomas More, 1478-1535, Locke, Rousseau, 1712-1788, and Tolstoy, 1828-1910. On the right, conflict and aggression are seen as natural, whilst on the left, such behavior is seen as learned. Evidence on this key issue of nature versus nurture is both plentiful and inconclusive, and the reader is referred to standard texts on social psychology and anthropology for details. However, if we examine evidence from studies of genetically identical individuals, it is found that they do differ in such characteristics as intelligence and presumably agreement. Thus, there appears to be both a genetic and a social component to human nature. Following Eysenck and Cumming, 19, an examination of the expectations about human nature to be found in different societies shows that they do seem to differ quite radically. There are groups such as the Zuni Indians of New Mexico, which place a premium on cooperation and consensus, and other groups such as the Dobu of New Guinea base their whole social structure on the assumption of mutual competition and aggression. Benedict 1935 suggests that both societies show a range of temperament within individuals. Many of the classical 16th and 17th century writers on political theory attempted to argue the case for the need to have a state. Thomas Hobbes suggested that in such a state there would be a war of every man against every man, and again early libertarians such as Locke and Rousseau argued against this partly by suggesting that even without the state, men were social animals who would cooperate. Although, is the state necessary? As we saw in an earlier chapter, there is evidence for Locke and Rousseau's view if we understand the debate to be a literal one. Societies like the Tiv, Zuni, or Dobu do not have a centralized decision-making apparatus, equipment, tools, materials, claiming authority over a given territorial area. Thus, the state may be desirable, but it is not. However, it is difficult to envisage a modern industrial large-scale society functioning without some such mechanism. Difficult, but first, it may be our first definition
represents the colloquial, informal definition of anarchism, supported by few. Arguably, it might. In Oxford English Dictionary, anarchism is defined as the absence of government. Goldman, 1915, defined anarchism as the philosophy of a new social order based on liberty unrestricted by man-made laws. The Woodcock, 1975, defined anarchism or anarchy as a doctrine, a school, which possess. Emma Goldman's 1869-1940 definition highlights the anarchists' opposing view that order need not to be. Writers such as Tolstoy, 1828, 1910, and Kropotkin, 1842, 1921, would. The concept of justice is caricatured by imprisoning the concept of defense is caricatured by destroying the lives of millions to defend the interests of the propertied minority. Most anarchists argue that our present wasteful, urban, industrialized lifestyle should be replaced by a more ascetic. Kropotkin argued that 5 hours labor a week from everyone could yield, follow, consider, comply with a middle class lifestyle for all. Autonomous communes and voluntary, literally educational, artistic, and sporting associations would freely exchange goods and services on an. As Woodcock's definition suggests, a crucial problem of anarchists is how to make the transition to the new state of affairs. Most would advocate simply withdrawing consent from current ways of doing things and practicing a new libertarian lifestyle. Hence, a number of anarchists have sought to set up communes independent of current states, whilst Proudhon, 1809, 18, the anarchist sees revolutionary change as something immediate, something we must do now, where we live, where we work. It means starting this moment to do away with authoritarian relationships between men and women, between children and parents, between one kind of worker and another kind. Such
revolutionary spirit cannot be quashed like an armed uprising. Quoted in Pinnock and Chapman, 1978. A minority of anarchists urge that the state machinery needs to be smashed by armed insurrection or have taken to terrorist violence. This violent change in giving dynamic to the downtrodden millions of the globe, science has done its best work. A pound of this good stuff beats a bushel of ballots, all hollow. Joan, anarchism as a political movement has had perhaps the most anarchist thinking, however, influenced Gandhi and the Indian independence movement, the student movements of the 1960s, and many other. Why should I obey the state? The democratic view stresses that it is the duty of the good citizen to respect the products of the decision-making processes. Analyzing political, very often, political debate in practice is an attempt to label your opponent's ideas with what Well Done 1953 calls a boo word. Even mental illness, the last bastion of, of religious healers, is gradually passing into the hand of the scientists, as when Ayatollah Khamenei, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, needs to make a crucial decision about the Iranian economy, he will not be able to find the necessary answer in the Quran because 7th century Arabs knew very little about the problems and opportunities of modern industrial economies and global financial markets. So he or his aides must turn to Karl Marx, Milton Friedman, Friedrich Hayek, and the modern science of economics to get answers. Having made up his mind to raise interest rates, lower taxes, privatize government monopolies, or sign an international tariff agreement, Khamenei can then use his religious knowledge and authority to wrap the scientific answer in the garb of this or that Quranic verse and present it to the masses as the will of Allah.
You sure?
بحال شي كونتراتاك في الشبكة دقيقة 90 حمال الحروف والدراك حقيق السنين. شوف العرض كلشي واضح غير انت اللي مكلخ العجاب وفوق كاع ما بان لي وانت بالك.
الله الوطن الملك سكوزا سنيك با انا مامون بافلو باترون انا امي بوطانا ديجا درنا وهضرنا مشات خلا النخوه ولدي صافي بقاو جدا كي النخله كندوز وقتي قبل ما نولع طامودود. انا الانسان اللي طلبو مسلك وماشي عقود. انا اللي عايش بخير كنفيق حتى كنتفكر باقي عايش وانت معايا وكدا داوري في الدوالي بجونا في الدار واش كيستيون ريطوريك غير بوليميك لا دوينا الكريتيك زعما حنا غرباء حنا ولاد هاد الارض رغم العنابه. قطار الحياه تجيب غير طورتور في لامونش لادنا عنده طورتور في السيفي ملور كسر مكسر وملعب المخزن كسر والكينغ رجال على الجلفل اللي عايش بابور. راه بلاد زعما براب فيه مخيطاش نفوبير بالوطن ولا انا بقيت نجول انا تشوبي شوفي شعب من بابا الي بنادم نايا لوبي الي وفي سو بروش كلشي جو في ديفلوبي شبيني وبين شي لوبي تا الدوله خويا زيد اوبي ستوبي على القلاوي ستوبي وراسي كوبي الشام تلوش الجميع الشام حاسس والو راه كيشيت وليك مصوصه الدفوار نبلغ هاد الليله الناس مرتاح ماشي القدر سكاتنا كنا ولاد القحاب رموكو اف سيس كيلو رصاص بيلوتو كاميكاز الحرب والقصاص فرقع لتحت ولا الفوق راه كلشي تيروريست كاميرا كتسكل الكادراج وتخلق فيه شي لقا يخرجوا بالشموع سوقات البرلمان عليك لمان عليك لمان دام الشعب حيوان رغم مان ولله الحمد. وهاد الحكي وسط الصاد في مصلحة شحال من فرد قرض وراه برودكسيون سوسيال كل جيل زاد باع ديباسينا الحوال في القرون الصوفة لي صاروا فهاد الكناب كل خمس تنباع والراعي في الظل مخلطة فورميل وهوفة يروفة اللي في الجود الشيور بلاش بركة لويلكم اللي طاحوا بمانا شي في نص براكة جموع لمي ما تخص نديرو نهاية هاد العام ما خفاش الشط درينا مزيان تاع الطلب بالعرض السنة والفرض فيك التجربة البوليتيك الشيوخ سكسولوك حبسو في حكم الزك والنيل يوجد سائل فقر يبدل الحاكم خاصها تقطع وانا عارف انهم ربيت الفرس الضبع بالطبع الراب طريح الفراش ندير رميت خذ المواعيد بعيد كي رونديفو يا تراميد إن عندكم دوزو في طابير وجا صوتي مأطر بوش كديرو البوشة بوش مع الصفا وتكون رابور راح فتت قوان المملكة ما تحشاش البوش سالف من التكرار ما توقعش في العقبة يا ولاد القحاب وقفتو في العقبة ما حنا بلاد ما حنا غابة عندنا الحرية عتبة واللي حاكمنا في الساعة ياك غنقول لك هاد
بارك